Yeah, I know.
Something has come up, I think, in our coverage, Rachel, and I'm gonna show that video again tonight that you showed of these kids in the New York City facility, and we blur their faces. Now, that's what we would do if we were in a New York City public school room, for example, and we were not didn't have the permission of the parents, everyone involved, to show the children's faces. But these are missing children. We used to have the faces of kids on milk cartons in this country because we were trying to reunite these missing children with their parents. We're trying to find them. I don't know what the answer to this is, but I'm wondering whether we should be blurring those faces or whether we should be showing those faces so that perhaps the parent or the cousin of the parent of one of these people somewhere out there in the country sees one of these faces and is able to tell someone in the family, she's in New York, she's in New York City. I just saw her on TV. I don't know how we should handle this.
It is a very difficult thing. Obviously, in our, we are under the NBC News umbrella. We follow NBC News standards, and as a matter of course, somebody who can't consent to having their image used in a video, we don't use their image in a video. It's particularly something that we're super careful about when it comes to kids. But what you are saying dovetails absolutely. This new reporting from the Washington Post that one of the things they're thinking about doing with kids is essentially by taking mug shots of all of these kids. Mug shots, which is insane because they're not criminally implicated at all. Taking mug shots of all of these kids. Immigration attorneys who have apparently seen some of the initial mugshots say that the images are of crying children in these mugshots, but apparently the government has some idea that they'll use pictures of these kids somewhere in the reunification process if they ever get that process up and running. I know what we had to do in terms of getting that video in the air in a way that I feel ethically sound about, but what you are saying is absolutely true.
Yeah, and you and I saw that video without blurred faces.
Yeah.
And it is a more powerful video without blurred faces. It has much more impact. But I'm just raising the question, and I'm raising it with you and everyone else in this business. And I think what the Washington Post is considering is something that is very much worth considering. It's a complicated set of issues.
Yeah, and you're right about the unblurred video. And just that little girl Jessica, crying her eyes out, talking to that woman who's trying to help her. It's just
and being able to actually look into her eyes makes a lot of difference.
You're right. Absolutely.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, my friend.
Well, the question remains tonight: where are the babies? The President of the United States ordered the arrest of mothers and babies, including infants in the first months of life who are breastfeeding, and the President cannot answer the question, where are the babies? No one can answer that question. Even senators, United States senators who have gone looking for the babies can't find them. Nevada's junior senator, Democrat Catherine Cortez Masto, was in Texas today looking for the babies and the girls.
We see what they want us to see. So we don't know where the girls are. We've never seen any of the babies or the young kids. We've seen the boys in one facility, and it's outrageous. Red flags go up everywhere, right? That they're trying to hide something, or something is happening here that they don't want the public to know. And I think that, to me, is of more concern than anything I've seen so far.
Senator Elizabeth Warren had a bit more luck, and it was just luck that she managed to see some of the girls and exactly one baby in McAllen, Texas this weekend.
It's a disturbing picture. There are children by themselves. I saw a 6-month-old baby, little girls, little boys. They're all on concrete floors in cages. There's just no other way to describe it. They're big chain link cages on cold concrete floors and metal blankets handed out to people.
Some people working in these facilities are trying to secretly deliver the message of what is happening in them. And the video you are about to see was first shown by Rachel in the last hour. It is reportedly from a facility providing daytime care for some of these children in New York City. These are incarcerated children. They are not free to leave. This is not like your kid going to daycare, you dropping your kid off at daycare. The source of the video is reportedly someone who worked in that facility who then quit after making this recording last week.
hablar con tu mamá? ¿Quieres que llame a tu trabajadora? ¿Sí? ¿Cómo te llamas? Jessica. Ya, Jessica, no llores, ¿ok? ¿Tú viniste con tu mamá? ¿No? ¿Viniste sola? ¿Con tu hermano? ¿Ah?
Con mi hermano.
¿Con tu hermano? ¿Y cuántos años tiene tu hermano? 10. Mira, agua. ¿Y dónde está tu mamá? ¿Eh? ¿Está en inmigración? No, ¿no sabes dónde está? ¿No sabes dónde? ¿Eh?
Allá en los estados.
¿En los estados? ¿No sabes en qué estado está? Oh, en Virginia. ¿Pero has hablado con ella? ¿O quieres hablar con ella otra vez? ¿Cuándo fue la última vez que hablaste con ella? ¿La semana pasada? ¿No has hablado esta semana? ¿No has hablado con ella? ¿No te han venido a ver para hablar con ella? Ok, so yo voy a mandar el mensaje. ¿Cómo te llamas otra vez? ¿Cómo? Jessica. ¿Y cuál es tu apellido para decirle al mismo?
The eyes are the window of the soul, and if you could see that little girl's eyes, as we were able to before that video was blurred, you would see the tears, you would see the pain, you would see much more of who that little girl really is. That little girl, Jessica, is yet another voice that we have now heard from inside the Trump jails holding children. We heard another voice that has been inside the Trump cages this weekend when the Washington Post released the tape of a phone call that a 6-year-old little girl in the United States was allowed to make to her father in his village in El Salvador, where the phone call was recorded. It is a phone call we should all listen to in its entirety, and you can do that at the Washington Post website. But here is the moment when she asked her father, who she has not seen since they were separated at the southern border, when he was coming to get her. And up to this point, their conversation had a normal rhythm of question and answer to each other, but then came a very painful and long silence as her father tried to think of the right thing to say to his daughter when she asked that very simple question: when are you coming to get me, Daddy?
Papa. ¿Cuándo vienes a cantarte? ¿Cuándo me vas a sacarme a ti?
Ya te van a ir a traer, mi amor.
¿Cuándo?
Hay que no arreglar el avión.
They have to fix the airplane. That was the best he could do. Then he quickly changed the subject. This weekend, the president, who has arrested over 3,000 children at the southern border, played golf at a Trump golf course, as he does most weekends, and he did not spend 1 minute looking for the babies, not 1 minute, which is why my response to every one of his inane tweets now that have nothing to do with his job as President of the United States is, have you found the babies yet? Joining us now from El Paso, Texas, are Joy Reid, MSNBC national correspondent and host of AM Joy Weekends on MSNBC, and Cal Perry, NBC News and Global News editor, is also joining us. And Peter Shea is back with us. He's the president of the Center for Human Rights and Constitutional Law. And Joy, you and Cal managed to get inside one of these tent facilities that they have on a military base down there today. What did you see?
Well, we took a tour. There were 23 reporters in total. We were walked through this facility. It's a military camp. That's sort of no better way to describe it. There are various tents where the children do very structured activities. We saw kids lining up to go in and use the phone room. They're allowed to make 2 10-minute phone calls a week that are monitored very closely by a staff member. There's a showering tent. There's a tent, like a mess tent. It's all extremely militaristic. It looks like any sort of military camp that you might see. We were able to see one sleeping tent, Lawrence, for some of the boys, which had 5 rows of bunks on either side, very neatly made bunk beds with a blue blanket and a pillow. There was a little table when you first walked in where I saw some crossword puzzle books and some other books. One of the things that struck me, and Cal and I both talked about this with each other afterwards, that was really striking, there were crayon drawings on the walls of this particular bunk. Children, it's not clear who drew them. Obviously, some were in English, some were in Spanish. There was one that struck me that it was drawn in crayon, and in Spanish it said, "No temas, don't be afraid. Nos he oído tu voz," which means we have heard your voice. And below it, it said Genesis 21:17. That's a Bible verse that is about the Handmaid's Tale. It's about the story of the Egyptian slave who was given to Abraham and made to bear a child for him and his barren wife. That Bible verse was sitting on one of the walls. There was another sign in English in crayon on the wall that said, "If you work hard, good things will happen." Like, there were these signs on the walls, and it wasn't clear who drew them. But the last thing I'll say before I go back to you is that what struck me, just as a mom, as a parent, we were allowed to see the children. We weren't allowed to talk to them. We could say hi. We were encouraged to smile at them. We were told that they were made nervous when the delegation of, when members of Congress came through. So we were told to smile. We could say hola. We could say ¿qué tal? We could say, ¿cómo está la comida? How's the food? And that's it. But talking to the boys who were 13 to 17, and some were really small, but, 13 to 17 age boys are a certain type of kid, right? They're teenage boys. They're not very verbal necessarily. Some were a little bit more willing to talk and to smile back than others. Some looked really distant. And what that worker was able to do to talk to little Jessica is what I wanted to do just as a mom. You wanted to ask them questions. How are you? Where is your mom? Like, where's the last time you saw her? It was very hard to resist asking those questions, but we didn't want to cut short have the tour cut short.
Cal Perry, I want to get your observations of that visit.
Listen, it felt like a forward operating base that you would see in Iraq without the mortar fire or the exceptional security around the outside, although we were told if these kids were to run from the camp that they would be pursued. I thought, like Joy said, all of the things that you see in your own house with your own kids are magnified when you see these kids being walked from tents labeled Alpha 1 and Alpha 2, and the dining facility is called a DFAC. The orders of the day are given in a schedule in a very militarized zone. It's all the things that you see in your own kids. At that age, 13 to 17-year-old boys are completely different sizes, right? They develop very differently. So you've got on a soccer field kids that are completely different sizes from each other. I was struck by seeing the girls. We weren't able to go into the girls' tent, but individually 2 girls came out. And again, this look of shell shock, this look like they were almost sort of no longer blinking, and you just sort of looked at them and thought, what did they go through walking here? And now what are they going through in this military facility? One of the drawings that struck me was one from this girl who said she walked all the way from Honduras. I think the other thing that I was struck by is that I think this is where this story is coming. I think the U.S. government is disappearing kids. They're doing it in the middle of the night. And I think what we're going to see now is this administration is going to see this video that we just played out, and they're going to move these kids to a military base. And they're going to become military detainees, these children. And we're just going to lose complete access, and we're going to have to rely on whistleblowers who know that now is the time to be standing up and counted, Lawrence.
Yeah, and Lawrence, can I just say really quickly that, to amplify Cal's point, these kids had already been moved. These were not kids who were detained at the border and then were brought to this facility that was just stood up. I mean, the soccer field was brand new sod that they had just laid. It only has a 30-day mandate. It's supposed to shut down July 13th. We didn't get a clear answer on where those kids are going to go after that. But these were kids who had been scattered around the country at one of these 100 facilities in 17 different states. And when one of the babies, you keep talking about where are the babies, when a baby had to be moved in, or a toddler or a little kid, and the facility under the tent was not appropriate for a little kid, they had to give up their bed and be moved from wherever they were in the country to that facility. So one of the things that was really confounding to me is how we could have been told that they know exactly, the HHS knows where all the kids are. These were kids who have already been moved at least once. So they're being moved around the country, and they wound up in that tent.
And kids who have very few belongings, but we were told that they are so aware of the situation of how they're being moved around the country that some kids, some children are leaving behind the very few belongings that they have for the next children who's going to come into that camp.
And Joy, I just want to cover one point here, which may be semantic. It might be more than semantics, and that is, what do we call these places? Some of the places we look at, we've been shown pictures that are controlled by the federal government and submitted publicly by the federal government. We have no idea when they were taken. We don't even know what year they were taken necessarily in some cases. But people are struggling with what to call these places. I've heard people call them jails. I have called them jails because what I've seen has most resembled, in my experience, jails, temporary incarceration. They are all incarcerated in that they are being held against their will, and they are not free to leave. And that is true no matter where they are in the course of this process. I've heard Jonathan Alter call them Trump's cages. What should we be calling these places? When I hear detention, I remember high school when I was sent to detention, which meant I had to stay late that day before I was then free to leave. I don't think we've found the language for what we're looking at.
Well, I mean, I think American history gave us the language, which is internment camps. I mean, these are military-style camps. They're not being run at the moment by the military. They're going to become literally military internment camps, apparently, when the Pentagon opens these two facilities, one for entire families and one for children. But what we saw, what Cal and I walked into today, was a military-style camp, but it's being run by a nonprofit, by a company that either bid or just was awarded a contract to run this facility for the HHS department, but with the Department of Homeland Security literally next door. So to Cal's point, if a kid were to try to run, they're not going to get away. They're in the middle of the desert. There were signs that said, beware of rattlesnakes, and they would run right into the arms of DHS. It is internment. Some of these kids had been there. We were told the average, 57 days. Why does it take 57 days to find their family and give them back?
Cal Perry, quickly, before we have to squeeze in a break here, with your experience around the world, what would you call these facilities?
Internment camps are black sites. I visited some of those sites in Baghdad where we held some of the quote-unquote biggest terrorists in Iraq, and the similarity there is that you're putting someone into a camp and you're not allowing them to look outside, but you're allowing people to look inside. And when we were in that emergency operations trailer, the cameras pointed in all different directions, pointed at the kids, watching their every movement, the way they were walked from one tent to the other. It reminded me of a black site, Lawrence. All
right, we're going to have to leave it there. And Peter Shea, I'm going to ask you to please stay with us over the commercial break into the next discussion block, because you've had more experience with these facilities than any of us, and I want to get your view of what you call them and what your experience as a lawyer in them tells you about them. Joy Reid, Cal Perry, thank you for joining, initiating our discussion tonight. Really appreciate it. When we come back, we will be joined by Mike Murphy and Ron Klain. They will talk about the politics of all of this. They will talk about what the president had to say tonight in South Carolina. And Peter Shea will join us. He is the lawyer who is handling the legal case that controls the way children are treated in these facilities. That legal case has controlled these rules for decades now, and the federal government is trying to change those rules. They will have to go through Peter Shea in federal court in order to change those rules. We'll be right back. Here's the president today talking about his frustration with judges in immigration cases.
We have to change our laws. We have to make them sensible. They came in to see me last week. They said, we'd like to hire 5,000 more judges. 5,000. You ever hear of a thing like that? Judges. Well, we're appointing 145 judges here, and everyone goes through this extreme vetting process. We're talking about 5,000. Where do you find 5,000 people to be judges? And you know what it leads? It leads to graft. It leads to a lot of other things.
Joining us now is attorney Peter Shea. He's the president of the Center for Human Rights and Constitutional Law. And Peter, as our viewers should by now know, you have been in charge of the Flores case, this federal lawsuit that in its settlement established the rules for treating children being held in these conditions that they've been in for the last few weeks on the southern border. And I want to get your reaction today to the president's comments about the judges and about due process. He issued a tweet saying he would like to be able to just turn people away from the country and turn them right around using no judges or court cases and bring them back where they came from. Your reaction to that?
Lawrence, I really think that it's astounding, especially since this whole policy that he's come up with was a zero tolerance policy for alleged lawbreakers, and yet every step of his policy has involved breaking either federal law or international law. In this particular case, he's saying we should return them immediately with no judges, no hearings. The United States is a party to the 1967 protocol relating to the status of refugees. The United States Congress ratified that international agreement in 1968. There is no way under our obligations, under that international treaty, which becomes part of domestic law, there's absolutely no way that you can illegally apprehend children or children with their parents and simply deport them to a country where they face persecution, they face potential torture, they face potential death, without giving them a fair and a complete hearing on their asylum claims. Nor, for that matter, can you do what President Trump has done, and that is to charge 1,000 or 2,000 parents of these children with crimes and coerce their guilty pleas by holding their children hostage. That is also illegal under international law and domestic law.
On this image of holding the children hostage, they are being held hostage throughout, all around the country now. We know some of them are in Michigan, some of them are here in New York City, and we have this smuggled video now from one of these facilities in New York City. And these facilities vary in their degree of resemblance, I guess I would say, to prisons or jails. How would you describe the condition of these children? It seems in legal terms they are all legally incarcerated. They are not free to go no matter where they are.
These children are definitely incarcerated. We have been monitoring the conditions of their detention for several years, but more recently, in the previous 6 months, we have found children sleeping for several nights on cold concrete floors with no mats or mattresses. We have found children with only access to dirty drinking water. We have found children in soiled clothing and wet clothing with no change of clothing. The conditions are fairly atrocious at this time.
Peter Shea, thank you for joining us once again tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Ron Klain and Mike Murphy will join us next on the politics of this. And coming up, President Trump, remember when he was so fond of Harley-Davidson? Now he is going to war with Harley-Davidson. While most of the country is worried about finding the babies President Trump arrested and reuniting them with their parents, President Trump went to South Carolina tonight and did not say one word about those babies. Instead, he found time to talk about the plastic surgery that his wife did not have.
They had all kinds of projections. They said she got a facelift. No, I would let you know. They couldn't hide that one for long, right?
The only person that I ever heard say Melania Trump got plastic surgery was Donald Trump last month, denying that she got plastic surgery after saying that other people said she had had plastic surgery, which I didn't hear anybody say. The president didn't say a word about the First Lady's visit to the southern border last week after she visited a small number of teenagers being held at the nicest facility in Texas. The president tweeted this about the kids being held in the Trump cages, the Democrats tell their phony stories of sadness and grief. Now, did he say that because the First Lady told the president that after her visit? That those kids that she met told her phony stories of sadness and grief? As far as Donald Trump is concerned, it's as if his wife never went to the southern border. He's never told us a single thing that the First Lady reported back to him. According to the president, the only thing she told him is why she wore a jacket on that mission of mercy, saying, "I really don't care, do you?" Joining us now is Ron Klain, the former chief of staff to Vice Presidents Joe Biden and Al Gore, and a former aide to President Obama. Also with us, Mike Murphy, a Republican strategist who has advised both Mitt Romney's and Senator John McCain's presidential campaigns. He's also an MSNBC and NBC News political analyst. And Mike Murphy, I know you were tweeting the president's speech tonight, which I was not able to watch in total. What did I miss?
Well, you know, it's funny. I don't watch a lot of them, but I knew I'd be talking tonight, so I kind of chained myself to the TV. And I felt like psychiatrists must feel, which is, can I send a bill to somebody for listening to all this? He's in such a bubble of narcissism. It's interesting. He played some of the old hits. He scratched all the cable news itches that he has from things he's seen that might have offended him. And kind of went around in circles, got in a shot at Mark Stanford. I think the only politically significant thing, because we've seen the crushing of facts and the make-believe world and the sloppy rhetoric. He said the press were the enemy of the people. Seen it all before. I did notice, just being a political operative, that when he rolled into the material on the trade war, he got some applause, but it was weaker. It seemed like the energy kind of left, and that's probably because the largest BMW plant in the entire world is 100 miles north of where his rally was in South Carolina, and they're going to get hurt by the retaliatory tariffs. So that was kind of interesting to me, that even his crowd, the core of his core, didn't seem to be buying that, which is where economically he's betting a lot of his the next months of his presidency.
Ron Klain, if any other president's wife, any other first lady had traveled to a crisis area where children are in crisis by the thousands, over 3,000 seized by the Trump government down there, that president would, in public speaking, be referring to what the first lady reported to him, what the first lady brought back, what valuable insights he now has as a result of the First Lady's visit. We're still waiting for that.
We are, Lawrence, and I have no idea what the message on the back of the First Lady's jacket meant, but I think it's pretty clear that Donald Trump is the one who definitely does not care about those children held in those Trump cages down in Texas and now around the country. I mean, tonight's speech was, as usual, festival of hatred, insults, and self-indulgence. It included a long segment on why Johnny Carson was a better late-night host than Jimmy Kimmel and various other idiocies from the president. But as you said, not a word, not a sound, not a peep about 2,000 plus children who are forcibly separated from their parents. And I think that just shows the kind of callousness the president has about this and where he is on this.
And Mike, the president's ignoring of the subject, is that, I mean, is there any political options list on which that makes sense? I mean, if you're actually trying to win a majority of votes?
No, I think there's, you know, he's in his own reality. I think Trump sees every election as a Republican primary, so he zeroes in on what he imagines, you know, his vote, his base, his tribe, and then creates this fictional world. Now, the fact is, and I'm sure political advisors around the White House, and I know inside the Republican Party, including a lot of electeds, know that this is not only a stain on the White House and frankly on the country that we are treating kids like this, which is not the values of this country and not our history. This is a political disaster in at least 50, probably 100 congressional districts. There's no swing district or even near swing district anywhere where this is not a horrible thing politically, as it ought to be. And I fear, but you know, in some ways it will be justice that Republicans who are silent in their congressional districts about this are going to pay a huge price on Election Day.
And Ron, it would be so easy for this administration to arrange a visit to babies wherever they're being held for United States senators. They could do that in a matter of hours if what the senators were going to see were babies being treated very well.
That's right, Lawrence. And I think any other president, Democrat or Republican, I don't think they would ever do this. But if somehow something like this has happened, they would be on top of fixing this. They would insist that something be done to reunite these children. Instead, the president is obsessed with his Twitter feed. He needs to get these children, these parents back together.
Well, they announced that they are creating a task force to do it, which is government's way of saying we don't know how to do it. That's why we have to have a task force. Ron Clay and Mike Murphy, thank you both for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Up next, I visited the New York Stock Exchange today for the first time in decades, and of course, the market tanked. Was it me? Or was it the Trump tariffs and what they are doing to America's favorite motorcycle company, Harley-Davidson? Yes, this means there will be pictures of my motorcycles coming up. Remember when Donald Trump loved Harley-Davidson? Well, now Donald Trump has done serious damage to that company. And I don't just mean a nasty tweet. The day after his inauguration, when President Trump saw the largest inauguration protests in history in Washington and in every one of the 50 states and around the world, he was afraid, and his White House staff was afraid. They were afraid to send him out into America where whatever he wanted to say might be drowned out by protesters. And that is why President Trump's staff canceled his visit to Wisconsin to the Harley-Davidson plant there in the second week of his presidency. And so Donald Trump invited Harley-Davidson executives to the White House to celebrate our iconic motorcycle manufacturer. The president used the opportunity to tell a lie about the history of the company, saying that in the early 1980s, Harley-Davidson was drowning completely because of unfair competition from foreign motorcycle manufacturers. The president said the foreign manufacturers, especially the Japanese, were dumping motorcycles. Now, dumping doesn't sound like a technical term, but it actually is. In international trade, it means selling a product in a foreign market for less than it costs to manufacture that product. But the truth is, Harley-Davidson, which in 1920 was the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world, was by 1980 the only American motorcycle manufacturer, and Harley-Davidson made the worst motorcycles sold in the American market then. Japanese motorcycles were better, and German-built BMWs were much better. I owned a couple of British motorcycles in those days, a BSA and a Norton. That's the BSA on the left there of your screen. That's actually in Northern Ireland. And the blue one on the right is the Norton, which was really one of my favorites until I totaled it in a very high-speed accident near Boston, which I was lucky to walk away from. And owning British motorcycles in those days meant that I was willing to put up with a little bit of oil leaking here and there, but I would not consider owning a Harley-Davidson then, because they leaked a lot of oil all over the place all the time. You had to be a very good mechanic to own a Harley in those days. The Japanese bikes and the BMW, they didn't leak a drop of oil. They were brilliantly engineered machines. The same was true in the American automobile market in the 1980s. American cars were mostly junk then, and Japanese cars and German cars were much higher quality. And here's how the CEO of Harley-Davidson described that period in Harley's history when it was on its way out of business. For years, we tried to figure out why the Japanese were beating us so badly. First, we thought it was their culture. Then we thought it was automation. Then we thought it was dumping. Finally, we realized the problem was us, not them. And so Harley designers and engineers actually studied the Japanese manufacturing model to figure out how to make a better motorcycle, and they did. And by the late 1980s, when Harley-Davidsons finally stopped leaking oil, I bought my first Harley-Davidson Harley-Davidson and then traded that one in for another Harley and have never looked back at foreign motorcycles. Harley-Davidson is a strong company again, making a great product, not despite international competition, but because of international competition. The Japanese and the Germans forced the Americans to make a better motorcycle, and the Americans rose to that challenge. If you're driving an American car tonight, you are driving a better car because of international competition, because the Japanese and the Germans have forced American cars to be better, much better. 10 years ago, I traded in a BMW for a Ford Fusion and haven't had a foreign car since. Imagine how bad American cars would be now if they never had to rise to the challenge of competition from high-quality Japanese and German cars. Donald Trump understands none of that. To him, international trade has no complexities and no surprising, unanticipated consequences. If Donald Trump tried to go to the Harley-Davidson engine factory in Wisconsin today, or the Harley-Davidson final assembly plant in York, Pennsylvania today, there would be protests, but they would be protests by people working at Harley-Davidson who will now lose their jobs because of Donald Trump. The European Union, which is Harley-Davidson's single largest foreign market, has imposed new tariffs on American motorcycles, which is to say on Harley-Davidson, in retaliation to the illegal tariffs that Donald Trump has imposed on Europe with the false claim that those tariffs are to protect our national security. Harley-Davidson's corporate response to the new high European tariffs on motorcycles made in America is to simply move some of their manufacturing capacity to foreign countries so that Harley-Davidson sold in Europe would not be Harley-Davidson's made in the USA, and they will therefore avoid the Trump tariffs and sell at a competitive price in Europe. And that means Harley-Davidson will cut its manufacturing capacity in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania in order to increase its manufacturing capacity in foreign countries. So Donald Trump's tariffs have succeeded already in only one thing, in sending Harley-Davidson jobs out of the United States. Exactly the opposite of what Donald Trump wants to do. Donald Trump once famously said that nobody knew that healthcare could be so complicated. Of course, everyone knew healthcare could be so complicated. Only Donald Trump didn't know. And the only thing that I ever encountered when I was working in government that is more complicated than the healthcare system is our system of international trade, which is filled with unintended consequences and counterintuitive outcomes that Donald Trump is incapable of anticipating or understanding. The stock market spent the day in decline today because of this kind of news about the Trump tariffs from Harley-Davidson. Harley-Davidson stock ended the day 6% lower than it began the day. So if you're a Harley-Davidson worker with Harley-Davidson stock in your retirement fund, every $100 worth of Harley-Davidson stock that you woke up with this morning is now worth $94, thanks to Donald Trump. There is no one working at a Harley-Davidson assembly line who doesn't understand international trade better than the President of the United States. Of winning yet, the workers at Harley-Davidson who will be losing their jobs thanks to the Trump tariffs don't call that winning. And of course, the president himself doesn't know what winning is in international trade. Here he is speaking tonight in South Carolina, which, unbeknownst to him, has the world's largest BMW plant.
We're winning. We're winning now, like we haven't won before. We're winning on trade. We're winning on trade.
Joining our discussion now, Austin Goolsbee, former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors for President Obama. He's currently professor of economics at the University of Chicago. And Professor Goolsbee, when I was studying economics in college, the professors always struggled to come up with real-world examples in international trade that were simple enough for students like me to follow. It seems we have finally arrived at one, even for me, the Harley-Davidson case.
Harley-Davidson is just the beginning. With all the economists have been saying, as Donald Trump has dreamed up more and larger tariffs on more and closer of our allies, as well as China, Japan, Canada, Germany, the UK, France. They've said you're going to destroy thousands more jobs than you are going to save, because on steel, there are far more steel users than there are steel producers in the United States. Whatever you do, you're going to lead them to then target U.S. industries, and Harley-Davidson's a perfect example. They're here. They're not 90 minutes from where I'm sitting right now, and in honor of July the 4th, hundreds of workers are going to be able to celebrate our nation's independence by losing their jobs, going to the very countries that the president thinks he's trying to punish.
And the one thing that businesses need, as Republicans are constantly reminding us, as if we didn't know, is stability. They need to be able to predict the future. And Harley-Davidson clearly is finding the future so unpredictable in terms of the European market that they have decided to increase production outside of the United States so that no matter what the president does or doesn't do, they will be able to sell motorcycles at a competitive price in Europe without having that Trump tariff imposed on them.
It's exactly what they did. Who loses from that policy? The American worker and the American consumer are the two people who lose. Harley-Davidson says we're going to be fine either way. We'll just take the jobs here, we'll ship them to Europe, and then the tariffs won't count. But ultimately, is that what we wanted to do? Of course it's not. I mean, this is like, you remember when your mom, you cross your eyes, and your mom would be like, don't cross your eyes. If you cross your eyes too long, you're going to get stuck that way. This is the most cross-eyed policy, and we are in high danger of getting them stuck that way. And if we do, we could take this recovery, which continues to proceed along nicely, and we could easily transform it into a recession, not just in the U.S., but worldwide.
The president tweeted angrily at Harley-Davidson, saying he's surprised that they are waving the white flag, as he put it. He says, I fought hard for them, and ultimately they will not pay tariffs selling into the EU. So, Austin, what he seems to mean there is, don't worry, these tariffs are all a fake. I'm threatening them. They're threatening me. They will back down, and you won't have to pay these tariffs in Europe. Just trust me, I'm Donald Trump.
Yeah, how's it worked out so far? Look, the thing is, this is a plan to lose weight by chopping your feet off. That's not a plan to lose weight. That's a terrible idea. And it's a really, really bad idea to start a $50, $100, $200 billion tariff escalating battle in which Donald Trump has not even put forward what his demands are, and then he can't understand why other countries are not negotiating with him.
Professor of Economics Austin Goolsbee, who now has a simple enough case on international trade to teach even students like me, and they will understand it. Thank you very much for joining us, Ted. Really appreciate it. Tonight's Last Word is next.